Well, hello everyone and welcome to another episode in this continuing series on how to grow in containers here on the MIgardener channel. I'm so excited to talk about this episode, which is going to be on how to grow tomatoes. Now, tomatoes are the icon of the home garden. People grow more tomatoes than anything else here, at least in the United States, and it's something that I think is so gratifying. If you can grow a homegrown tomato and taste it, you not only taste the richness that is so much better than in the store, but it's also the flavor of success. You know, there's a certain successful flavor that you say, oh man, I grew that. It makes everything taste so much better, I think you'll find. And so I hope you all will enjoy this episode. We're gonna jump right on into it. We're gonna talk about the container size, fertilizing, soil type, watering, sunlight requirements, stuff like that. And it's going to be potting specific. So I hope you all are going to add this to your container garden by the time we're done, or at least reinforce some stuff that you might already have, because I know a lot of people grow tomatoes in containers, but I see so many people having problems with tomatoes in containers. So I hope you all will enjoy, and let's get started. Let's head over to the potting station. All right, so when we're talking containers, you need a large container for tomatoes. Tomatoes have a huge root system, and in order for them to produce the amount of fruit that they do, you need a lot of soil, and it needs to be rich soil. So the container that we're using is a 5-gallon container. It's really about 4.5, but it's marketed as a 5-gallon nursery pot. And you can get these for free at nurseries at the end of the year. A lot of times they throw them out. A lot of times you can find people that just recently transplanted a tree. They're throwing them out at the road. So don't go buy one. At least get one for free if you can. But you can also buy one if you need to. I just always go the free route because it's so much easier to you don't feel the pain when it cracks, after 3 or 4 seasons. You're like, well, I got it for free, so I didn't really lose anything. So we're using a 4.5 5-gallon container, and we're gonna fill it up with some of our potting mix here. This is a potting specific mix. It's been pre-moistened. Pre-moistened soil helps to reduce transplant shock because we are using transplants that we started from seed ourselves, but you can buy them from the store, whatever works for you. And the soil needs to be loose. It's a potting specific mix like we talked about. And what that means is that it's geared specifically for growing in containers, because oftentimes people, they just go with a topsoil, or they go with, some type of, whatever's available at their store. And they say, well, I hope this works. And they don't check on the bag, and it's not a potting specific soil. What happens is the fact that if it's not a soil that's geared specifically for potting mix, it's going to be lacking the essential components that are necessities for having a successful patio garden, or a successful container garden for that matter. And that is equal parts of well-draining material to organic matter. So oftentimes, like a regular topsoil, they just scrape some person's soil and says, well, bag it up, sell it, that'll work. But what they don't realize is that there's not those equal parts of well-draining material to organic matter. You might have organic matter, but you do not have the well-draining component to it. So potting mix has stuff like perlite, bark chips, like composted bark chips and humus, and vermiculite and sand, and like teeny tiny bits of pea gravel, things that help it to drain well, help it to keep from clumping together. See here, we got a nice ball, but look, the moment you touch it, it just kind of crumbles apart. That's what you're looking for your soil. You want it to hold on to moisture well, but not hold on to too much. You want it to be well draining and fluffy, full of organic matter, because that organic matter is what's going to help feed the plant throughout the growing season. Now, when it comes to spacing, this is something that people oftentimes really make the mistake of putting too many plants in at once. With tomatoes, you want one plant. Just one plant. Now, I know in other episodes I've really crammed them in here, but I cannot stress that in a pot like this, it's important to have just one plant, because it's going to be far too stressed, and the stress on the plants will prevent them from producing well. So what we're doing here is we're just planting this one plant to ensure that it's going to have enough space to really put its roots down and take up all the soil here in this pot. So when it comes to fertilizing your tomato plant, it's important to give them a well-balanced fertilizer that's high in nitrogen and phosphorus. What that's going to do is it's going to help the plant grow initially. You don't want to put too much of anything in the plant. Otherwise, it's going to start focusing on other things. Phosphorus, for instance, helps with root development and flower production. However, you also need the plant to grow, otherwise there's really nothing for it to set fruit on, because tomatoes a vine and it will fruit all along the vine, assuming you have an indeterminate variety, which we'll get into in a second. The fact of the matter is that you need a plant that is proportionate to the amount of fruit that it's setting out. Otherwise, it's going to be lacking in something. So I always like to make sure that I give them even parts of the nitrogen and the phosphorus, and the plant will uptake how much it needs. So if there's extra, it'll just remain in the soil for the plant to uptake later. Then I also like to stress that it does need some micronutrients and trace minerals and things like that are going to help the plant get more well-balanced fertilizing, because the soil that you put in here most likely does not have those trace minerals. Regardless, it could be the best potting soil in the world, but it does not have those trace minerals. I almost guarantee it, because I've never found a potting soil that has the trace minerals. So what we use is we use Trifecta Plus in ours. That's a fertilizer and soil amender, and basically it has the essentials that you need. It has the beneficial microbes and fungi, it has the trace minerals, and it has the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So it's really well-rounded. It's everything you need all in one. But you can use, like I always say, for kind of a DIY home fertilizer, you can use crushed eggshells, a ground up banana. You can use 1 part green sand to 1 part bone meal to 1 part blood meal, and that's going to give you everything except for the beneficial fungi and microbes. So that's going to give you all those nutrients that you're going to need to have a well-rounded plant. So that's the fertilizer component. However, I do want to stress you need to fertilize. You need to fertilize about every month. I prefer every 3 weeks in a pot, because of the fact that in the beginning you don't need to fertilize as often. But I like to make it a practice so I don't forget, because as the plant grows and the plant gets bigger, the nutrient requirements and the amount of nutrients it needs, it exponentially grows with the plant growing exponentially. So by fertilizing every 2 weeks with an organic-based fertilizer, you're going to have a very successful plant. And I typically give it about 3 tablespoons of Trifecta every 2 weeks. I'll scratch it into the soil and I'll water it in. Even if it doesn't use those nutrients now, like I said, making a habit of doing it, you're not going to forget later on. And if the plant does not uptake all the nutrients, which it most likely won't uptake all of the nutrients right away, it's going to leave it right in the soil for the plant to uptake it later. So it's really a win-win situation. And now let's talk about watering. When it comes to watering, you need to water this very frequently, because it's in a container. Tomatoes are prone to something called blossom end rot, and that's basically a lack of calcium. However, you most likely have, if you have a very good organic matter rich potting mix and you have some type of fertilizer with calcium in it, like Trifecta or crumbled up eggshells and stuff like that, you're going to have enough calcium in the soil. And you might say, well, what the heck, I have lots of calcium in the soil. Why do I still have blossom end rot? It's because you're not watering frequently enough. Watering is essential for the plant to take up the calcium that's going to prevent the blossom end rot. So by watering about 2 times a week, you're going to prevent the blossom end rot. Tomatoes are more drought tolerant than some of your other plants, like your lettuce and your broccoli and stuff, but you still cannot let it get bone dry, and I would never let it get bone dry. So just make sure it stays damp, and make sure it gets a nice deep watering to get all those deep roots, and you're going to be fine. It's really a very easy plant to grow, and I seriously would not worry that much about how to grow it, super successfully, because it really knows how to grow itself, and you just got to keep the basics. Make sure the basics are there, and it's going to do fine, I promise. Now, the very last thing I want to talk about is sunlight. When it comes to sunlight, it's so important, more important than any other plant when it comes to sunlight. Make sure that your tomato plant, depending on the variety, does not get any less than 5 hours. if it's something like a larger beefsteak style tomato, make sure it gets no less than 7. Cherry tomatoes are convenient and they're great for potted plants, which is why I recommend growing cherry tomatoes in containers, because you're going to get way more of them and you're going to have a better chance at success. Now, the next thing is also just make sure you start with probably a determinate tomato. There's a difference between determinate and indeterminate. And determinate tomatoes, they basically get to a set height and stop growing. And that's very convenient for a potted garden, because sometimes in a potted garden, you don't have all that space for it to just keep growing and growing and growing. And so by getting a determinate tomato, it's gonna just be like, okay, I'm at 4 feet, I'm gonna put out all my fruit, and there you go. It's a little easier for beginning gardeners that don't have the resources to stake it up and trellis it and do all that stuff that you can do in a traditional garden. So they do have varieties for you for that. So just look for determinate, and that's a good place to start. But if you think you're up for a challenge, indeterminate will fruit all season for you, and you can typically have a lot more unique varieties as well, because there's a lot of unique varieties that are indeterminate, because those are typically your heirlooms. So with that out of the way, that's really all there is. That's really all there is. It's so simple, right? It's not difficult. So I hope you all enjoyed. Hopefully you all are going to try tomatoes. I highly recommend it. It's something that if you do not grow a tomato, grow at least one, because it's extremely simple and it's very easy to do. So I will talk to you all later. This is Luke from the MIgardener channel, hoping you all are growing bigger going home, and I will talk to you all later. See ya. Bye.